By the spring of 1982, a worldwide deal had finally been inked with Capitol Records. Dan Hartman was interested in producing and had offered to produce a demo of the new material with Rod for Capitol's consideration at Electric Ladyland Studios, Jimi Hendrix's old studio, over the following week.
We did that at Electric Ladyland Studios in New York, which was Jimi Hendrix's studio. So that was cool. With Dan, it was a little more, we were at that transition phase from being a punk rock band, I think, to become more of a heavy metal band. I was like to tell people that after we learned that fourth chord, instead of the old three-chord punk rock, that's kind of when we moved into that more metal direction.
In the meantime, German metal producer Dieter Dierks, who was just off the huge success of a #1 charting Scorpions album, had expressed interest in producing as well. Capitol preferred Dierks and the buzz of his huge recent success, and the chores went to him, with the Hartman demo being released years later under the name Coup de Grace. The album was recorded at Dieter's studio in Stemmen, Germany, over a roughly 2.5-month period. Rod had gotten the record company to approve additional funds for another bold cover, and 2 days before flying to Germany to record the album, Butch Starr shot the cover in the South Bronx with Wendy on top of a tank, which had been brought down from upstate New York on a flatbed truck. The location for the photo shoot was the exact spot where Ronald Reagan had held a photo op to give a political speech promising to rebuild the inner cities, and where nothing had been done since. In the liner notes to the reissued Coup, Rod is quoted as saying the residents, upon seeing the tank, were not sure at first whether martial law had been declared, they were being invaded, or liberated. But when Wendy arrived, she did her usual meet and greet the bystanders, with whom she was always able to develop an immediate rapport, and the shoot went forward without major incident, although it had been done in a hurry to avoid someone with a random camera scooping the shot. Coup d'etat was a groundbreaking record for a number of reasons. It was a quantum leap forward in the synthesis of punk and metal that Wendy and the Plasmatics had already pioneered, and it used the richness and power of metal to make powerful political music, pretty much unheard of in metal at the time.
Coup d'etat is an interesting album because in 1982, you had punk rock and you had heavy metal. And you had Motorhead and Venom, a couple bands sort of on the margins that were colliding the two. But the audiences were definitely separate. And the interests were separate. And the frames of mind were separate. And what the Plasmatics did with Coup d'etat is that they forced these two audiences that didn't like each other and didn't get along sort of together.
Dieter's father had been a classical conductor, and Dieter's attention to detail was extreme. The recording of just the drums and bass took longer for Coup than the entire recordings of any of the previous albums.
He had produced the Scorpions albums, so he came to New York to rehearse with us for about 2 weeks of pre-production. Everything we learned from Dan, Dieter kind of did 10 times over. And the approach there was to really get the bass and drums and the rhythm guitar tight. So we would rehearse for 10 hours a day for 2 weeks straight, maybe taking a 20-minute break at a time. And what Dieter did was he would run a click track through our PA system, so it was a constant beat, so their timing would be perfect for the record. It was a real Germanic approach, real tight.
T.C. Tolliver, the band's most heavy-hitting drummer to date, and the drummer who recorded more Wendy O and the Plasmatics albums and did more tours than any other drummer, was the drummer on Coup.
He came to the loft and we talked and met, and then a few weeks later we flew out to Germany. And cutting the tracks, I mean, Dieter's a hard worker, you know, to say the least, you know. I mean, the things that he hear, you know, he can hear a screw loose on my snare drum. I couldn't hear it, you know what I mean? It's things like that.
He was a great drummer, but he spent a complete 9-hour day just hitting a snare drum. I mean, this is how, you know, precise Dieter was.
And when I thought the album was complete, he asked if we were ready to do the album.
Ended up being in Germany for about 10 weeks. Originally thought it was going to be a short stay, maybe about 2 or 3 weeks, but it took quite a bit longer than that.
By this time, the precision required that Wes do almost all of the rhythm parts, as well as more and more leads.
I would come in and do some more leads than was originally planned, and did most of the rhythm guitar parts.
Part of the power in the construction of the songs allowed Wendy the opportunity to make her singing its heaviest yet, and she was determined to make it so. Chris Knowles in Classic Rock wrote of Wendy's vocals on Coup that you can hear the flesh in her throat shred as she wails on cuts like Put Your Love in Me and The Damned, and a cover of Motorhead's No Class. And shred it did. So hard did Wendy push her vocals that by the middle of the session, she was having to go into Cologne each day for treatments to try and keep her vocal cords from being permanently damaged. The reviews made the point. The LA Times, at a time when AC/DC completely ruled hard rock, called Coup d'etat the best slice of heavy metal since the last AC/DC album, adding that Williams makes Ann Wilson and Pat Benatar, the major female rock singers at the time, sound like folk singer Judy Collins. The newspaper's question about whether a male-dominated heavy metal audience would accept a female screecher underscored how groundbreaking what Wendy was doing was. This was previously entirely male territory. As far as the sheer power of the vocals, the Aberdeen Press from Janis Joplin's home state said that Wendy was doing vocally what nobody since Janis Joplin has done, while the Review and Cream magazine called it a breakthrough record. An aggressive female, the review went on, kicking down traditional barriers. And Wendy's physicality is now coming out of her voice. The Cream review by Cyril Blight attacked the sexism of those who can't handle or even resent the very idea of a woman like Wendy Williams singing rock and roll with ferocity, which is to say the same qualities they would applaud if they were coming from a man, providing there was a man around today with the balls to do that.
Well, I was over at EMI Records and I was doing something, they're interviewing somebody or other, not a Plasmatics thing at all. And the marketing guy who I knew said to me, "Oh, before you go, just come to my office and I'll play you something you might want me just to hear." And you know, I was on Kerrang at the time and a metal fan. And so he grabbed me by the arm, pulled me in, closed the door, turned up the volume. And I knew the Plasmatics, but not that Plasmatics. That was a real metal Plasmatics, and I loved it.
Capitol had agreed to put up a very modest sum of money for a video, but the video Wendy and Rod had in mind would not be modest, either in its symbolism, logistics, or danger. The idea of detonating a school bus was brought back, but this time the concept would feature Wendy first driving the bus, which had been loaded with explosives, through a wall of TVs, climbing onto the roof of the moving bus, and then jumping off a few moments before the bus goes through a second wall of TVs, and then blows sky high.
We backed a 24-foot Ryder truck up and loaded 500 black and white televisions in it and drove them to Phoenix.
TVs, school bus, helicopter, fire truck, ambulance, rattlesnake, camera equipment, and crew all had to be brought together in the desert. There was only one day allocated to do the run-throughs and then shoot the video, and this made it all the more dangerous. And of course, the school bus could only be blown up once, so there could be no retakes on that. During a run-through of the jump off the bus, Wendy sprained her ankle, and it looked like the shoot might have to actually be canceled, but the only time Wendy ever canceled anything was when she was in jail or unconscious, and canceling was not a choice from her point of view. "Put tape around it," she instructed one of the crew members, and with her ankle firmly taped with gaffer tape, the shoot went on.
And so she was wearing this wrap of tape around there, and we sort of laughed. There'll be a fashion statement the next thing you know. Everybody's going to be going to show that everybody's going to have a wrap of gaff tape around their ankle because you were doing it in the video. And it was just to give her support to her ankle. It was really fucked up. He was a trooper on that one.
With adrenaline going, she drove through the wall of TVs, climbed to the roof, sang the end of the song, and jumped. The explosion was not small. There was some alarm when one of the rattlers used for the rattlesnake shot seemed to be missing in one of the campers, but it turned up without incident, and the shoot ended with all required footage in the can, including some promos MTV had requested, ready for editing back in New York.
Oh, it was always scary, and she just wanted to do, the more outrageous the stunt, the more she wanted to do it. Because she'd stand up on the school bus with her arms outstretched as it's driving through the desert. And I mean, that's got to be an incredibly hard thing to do.
The A&R guy from the record company loved the video, and so did the only a few years old MTV, which ran a feature on it in their Rock Bill magazine, where they touted how popular the video would become from being in heavy rotation on MTV. Before the premiere, however, MTV's legal department got cold feet, and so did the record company. They insisted that a warning be at the beginning of the video, warning the audience not to try anything like this at home. The warning was added, and the premiere, hardly now promoted at all, went on, but the video was put instead in extremely light rotation and then pulled within weeks. In the meantime, as the tour itself started, it was clear that Capitol was running in the other direction.
Now this special live report from the Capitol.
Rod had produced a radio spot with Platinum Joe Klein, which went on to win a Clio Award, but Capitol refused to run. As the band showed up in towns, the record was not to be found in stores.
I pledge allegiance to the Plasmatics.
The world!
It was clear that almost before it came out, the record Coup d'etat had been effectively dropped by the record company. Chris Berry, writing in Long Island's Pipeline after the release of Coup d'etat, wrote that the swaggering Wendy O. Williams and the Plasmatics have evolved into the loudest anti-wimp, anti-anything soft entity in rock and roll history, the most cited for sensory assault gonzoid cult band of all time. The political Orwellian message, which was obvious in Beyond the Valley and then Metal Priestess, had really gelled musically in Coup d'etat, and although it would become fashionable in metal later, albeit in a kind of formularized, watered-down way, it was not something Capitol cared to deal with, especially done by a woman. A fluff group like Duran Duran could sell 10 times the records with none of the political liability.
So the political edge, which some of the speed metal bands adopted, was not being heard in the metal arena. You know, you started to see it in songs like, you know, Master Plan and 12 Noon on the Metal Priestess EP, on Coup d'etat, which is, you know, very explicitly political in its sort of Orwellian nightmare scenario. That sort of attitude would become very common in metal albums. You know.